Hi, everybody. My name is Mary Ida. I am the director of Canine Cancer Alliance, which I started about 8 years ago after losing our dogs to cancer. And the mission of Canine Cancer Alliance is to support research, fund research so that we can find much better treatments for cancer and get ways to reduce risks of getting cancer. So the topic of today's talk is causes and prevention or risk reduction. And I also want to just share a little bit about Canine Cancer Alliance. It's a very small nonprofit. I'm outside Seattle. Our volunteers are everywhere. So we're not just a local organization. And it's a volunteer-powered organization so that we can make sure that almost all the funds that we raise goes to support research. The project that is looking extremely promising right now is immunotherapy treatment that was developed at Yale University by Professor Mark Mamula. And we have been supporting that project for several years. And that clinical trial is starting to gather data showing that it does help dogs with osteosarcoma and even hemangiosarcoma live longer than compared to conventional treatments alone. So we have been focused on cancer immunotherapy research, but we are also starting most likely a new study that is looking at causes and risk reduction for cancer, especially for hemangiosarcoma soon. And I'll probably tell you more about that in the future. But if you would like to support us, we really welcome monthly donors, monthly members. And we are also doing a 5K run and a walk on May 4th. People who are here in Washington State can join us in Redmond, Washington. But if you're elsewhere, you could also do a walk where you are. We've had several people contact us saying that we'd like to do a local walk. So there might be one in Vancouver, in New York City, perhaps one in LA, and also in Connecticut, where Professor Mark Mamula is. So we'll let you know more about Wag Love Life, but it's a great way to join the community, get to know people, and help raise funds to support more research so we can help our dogs. So to start today, so cancer leading cause for dogs now. About half the old dogs die of cancer. In our case, we had 3 golden retrievers and they all ended up with cancer. So it does depend on the breed. In the US alone, about 6 million dogs are said to end up with cancer compared to about 2 million people. So, and it's not just older dogs, it could be puppies, very young dogs, not purebreds, but mixed breeds as well. They're all vulnerable. And today's treatments just are not good enough. So what cancer is cancer happens when the cell starts dividing out of control and keeps on growing and growing. And even though they're hitting other cells, they're just not getting the feedback to stop growing. And usually healthy cells, if it sees that there's something wrong with inside of the cell, if it's been attacked by a virus or bacteria, it will actually gracefully commit suicide. But that gone with cancer cells, so they keep on growing uncontrollably. So the old model is that cancer is a genetic disease caused by mutations, accumulation of DNA mutations until they become malignant and they start growing and they start metastasizing. And that's the old model. And the newer model for explaining the start of cancer, the cause of cancer, is that it's not only genetic mutation, but it's epigenetic changes. There's hormonal imbalance that's also helping cells turn cancerous. And there's chronic inflammation, which is related to immune changes, immune dysfunction that helps cancer grow. Now, so it's not just a single cause. It's not just mutation that accumulates that turns into cancer. It's not just looking at cancer, but cancer as it interacts with other cells around it, like immune cells and fibroblasts. And that interaction gradually helps those bad cells really turn into powerful growing cancer cells. So chronic inflammation is something that's extremely important that scientists now see as one of the things that enable cancer. And the cancer in gut microbiome is also extremely important because gut microbiome regulates the immune system and also produces all sorts of metabolites. In addition to that, There's stress. Stress can help an environment that makes it easy for cancer to grow. And as we age, there are epigenetic changes, hormonal changes, metabolic changes, and they all help cancer grow. Now, I want to mention a little bit about gut microbiome because people didn't talk about microbiome until about 6 years ago. And when you have dysregulation of gut microbiome, so that it's imbalanced, so that you don't have really good, healthy, heterogeneous mix of microbiome, but you have too much of certain bacteria, then it can actually lead to immune suppression and eventually tumor growth, not just in the gut, but elsewhere around the body. So it really plays a huge part and is linked to inflammation and making sure that immune system is working. It can also lead to hormonal imbalance as well. So I'll come back to this gut microbiome later on. So this is kind of the setting of, okay, the causes of cancer are things that puts these things out of balance. So can we reduce cancer risk for dogs? I'm going to share with you 6 things. Now, my recommendation, if you want to help your dogs, first thing to do is to do some research on your dog's breed because there's a strong breed dependence on cancer vulnerability. So, for example, there are certain dogs that have extremely elevated risk of getting certain types of cancer, such as bladder cancer. It's 18 times elevated risk for Scottish Terriers. The good news is there is a urine test to do early detection for bladder cancer now, and there are now increasing number of treatment options, including immunotherapy for bladder cancer. But it's better if you start these treatments early. So investigate, do study, research, do online lookup to see how vulnerable your dog's breed type is. Now, related to that is neutering and spaying. I've talked to somebody who was convinced that early neutering is linked to cancer. It is true that removing sex hormones does change metabolism and immune function, and it could increase inflammation, obesity, insulin resistance. And there's been a series done at UC Davis that looked at dogs, compared dogs who were neutered at different times, and also dogs who were not neutered. And so they drew a conclusion based on their study saying that if you have small or medium-sized dogs, then it's your choice to get them neutered or spayed from the standpoint of what's the risk of getting cancer or having joint disorders. But if you have medium or standard size or large size dogs or giant size dogs, then delay neutering. That was a conclusion they drew in a study that was published about 5-6 years ago. Now, this same team, actually, it's a husband and wife team at UC Davis, Professor Hart. They published another paper that looked at 35 breeds specifically and looked at the joint disorders and cancer and urinary issues. And their conclusion by analyzing the data that they had at UC Davis is that if you want to reduce the risk of having cancer, then for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 breeds, wait beyond 23 before you neuter or spay. But it depends on whether it's female or male. But for Doberman Pinscher and Golden Retrievers, they said, leave them intact. It's actually Golden Retriever females and Doberman Pinscher males, leave them intact. And so they were looking at data for dogs who were diagnosed with 4 very, very aggressive cancers: sarcoma, mast cell tumors, hemangiosarcoma, and lymphoma. And for example, in their analysis, looking at lymphoma incidence for golden retrievers, and for dogs that were spayed between 6 and 11 months, which is typical for many of the puppies, 11% of dogs had lymphoma, ended up with lymphoma. Now, if they waited a year, 6% of dogs ended up with lymphoma. But if you left them intact, only 2% ended up with cancer, with lymphoma. So it's a dog breeds, but especially for Doberman male, Golden Retriever females, that they concluded that they should be left intact if you really want to reduce chance of getting cancer. So it's breed dependent. And then for these breeds, like Bernese Mountain Dog and Cocker Spaniel, and they recommended, depending on, again, the gender, they recommended waiting 23 months. etc. So this paper table is public. I don't know if it's open, but if you want to look at this more carefully, feel free to email me and I can share this table with you. So if you have one of these higher elevated risk dog breeds, then you might want to consider ovary sparing spaying or vasectomy for male dogs. But of course, if you do that, there's a trade-off. If you do that, then you elevate the risk of getting mammary tumor for your dogs. So number one, think about what kind of breed you have, and then just do some research to find out what they're vulnerable to, which cancer types they're vulnerable to, and also learn about spaying and neutering um, studies. Now, number two, avoid chemicals, certain chemicals. Now, you probably heard that Roundup, and it's the compound in it called glyphosate, is a carcinogen. If you see a beautiful lawn, most likely it's been sprayed with Roundup or another type of herbicide, but it is a known carcinogen. Unfortunately, it is not regulated. It's still widely used in the US. It's different in other countries. Now, in water, air, and food, herbicides and pesticides end up in the food that we feed our dogs. So if you want to completely avoid it, you may need to consider getting organic food for dogs. Another compound that's in food that we might give dogs is aflatoxin. Now, this is a chemical that's released by mold found in corn and peanuts, and it's often in peanut butter. And so you want to always give your dog like fresh, recent peanut butter, not something that's made of peanuts that's been stored in humid um, location for a long time. So aflatoxin, just eating too much of peanut butter because of this risk is not a good idea for people and for dogs. Anthracene, arsenic, these can be found in air or water. So it would be if you start considering filtering the water you give your dogs and also using air filter in the house. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about the dust, the harm that certain dust can have. Also thinking about increasing food variety so that you're not just relying on like one type of kibble. Another thing that you probably heard is something called acrylamide, which is when starchy food, like dog food, kibble, is heated at high temperature. So it is linked to cancer, unfortunately, as well as all these other compounds, PAH and HCAs, that's linked to grilled, fried, or broiled food at very high temperature. Now, so if you start cooking food for your dog at home, it's good to look at the food, not give them food that's cooked at very high temperature. Now, again, you've probably been hearing about microplastics. About a couple of weeks ago, my son texted me and said, "Mom, have you seen news about microplastics that come out of tea bags?" So scientists have looked at how much microplastics are generated when you're using one of those nylon synthetic fiber tea bags, and it's billions. Now, I thought, well, I don't use nylon tea bags. But then when I looked at the paper, they also looked at the other tea bags that we do use common, which is not from synthetic fiber, but that also generates millions of microplastics. And microplastics are like 1/1000th of millimeters of plastics that are starting to become pervasive in our environment. And they come out of clothing that we wash, and then we run the dryer, and it goes into our dust, and it's vented outside. So it goes outside, but also they come out of tires as we drive, and tires deteriorate. They come out of water bottles, and not just microplastics and nanoplastics, which are solid plastics, but the chemicals that leach out of plastics, like phthalates and BPA, and also forever chemicals like PFAS. Now, these chemicals are all endocrine disruptors, so they mess with hormones. They cause inflammation. They disrupt gut microbiome. So there was a study that involved patients. They underwent surgery, and the researchers looked at microplastics in the plaques, arterial plaques, that were 60% of those patients had microplastics in their plaques. And if they had more, then they were 2.5 times more likely to experience heart attacks and stroke. Another study linked microplastics to dementia. They measured from autopsies, they measured microplastics in brains, and on average, there are about 7 grams of microplastics in each person's brain. And when they looked at a brain from dementia patients, they had up to 10 times more microplastics in it. Now, you may have also heard that there is recorded increase in cancer, especially colorectal cancer, in young adults under 50 years old. And there hasn't been definitive study, but the hypothesis is that microplastics, some of these chemicals that are leaching out of plastic or is being applied like forever chemicals, is doing harm to gut microbiome and inducing inflammation and maybe causing these increased cancer. So this all new data coming out in the last few years, and there hasn't been that much data with dogs, except we heard a really interesting paper just recently. And this is 2025 paper published by a team from Duke University and North Carolina State University. And what they did was they actually had, I believe it was 100 dogs who were given these special silicone detectors, cheap silicone detector that they would wear. And then that silicone would collect environmental toxins, dust and things. And then the researchers analyzed the silicone to see how much have from the environment. They also took urine samples from these dogs to see if they had precursors of cancer or if they had bladder cancer. So they tested for chemicals and they found 39 chemicals in more than half the pets. And the kind of chemicals that was really correlated with dogs who had cancer markers were flame retardants, PPDEs. They come out of furniture foam, and anthracene, which is basically in air pollution that gets emitted from burning coal, wood, oil, and also cigarette smoke, and phthalates, which is plasticizers, which are very common, be found in vinyl flooring, artificial leather. And the dogs with markers were exposed to greater number, so to different types of chemicals overall, and at higher levels. And the dogs who lived also in a warmer climate were also exposed to higher levels as well. So this is one of the really interesting studies. It's not causal, but in its correlation, there is a very undeniable link between bladder cancer and environment. And I just want to mention this flame retardants. You've probably heard flame retardants have been applied to children's pajamas, to furniture, and it was a big expose by Chicago Tribune that exposed that there were lobbyists who were working for both chemical industry and tobacco industry to promote use of flame retardants in furniture and clothing. And so because of their work, the government actually made it mandatory for these flame retardants to be applied to furnishings, furniture and beddings and clothing. But thanks to the expose, they realized that the witnesses who came to testify that without flame retardants, many children are going to be killed, etc., were actually fake witnesses. And so because that was uncovered, now flame retardants are no longer required, but we still have enough furniture and beddings and things from the past so that the team from Duke was measuring a significant level of flame retardants in their study. Let's see. So I know that this is really, really depressing. I mean, my son first told me about the microplastics in tea bag. I was just like thinking, oh, please, I don't want to hear this. But knowledge is power. If you build up the ability to detect, then you can take action. And so these researchers are uncovering clear links between environmental exposure and cancer. There needs to, of course, be more studies, larger studies, and then actions could be at the individual level and also at the regulatory level to counter this. And you probably know that some of in the US are banned in other countries. So in our country, the lobbying arm is extremely strong, but I'm very hopeful with more studies, these things could be addressed. I just also want to mention that there's a really interesting finding related to hemangiosarcoma. A human version of hemangiosarcoma. Hemangiosarcoma is a cancer of blood lining, and it is very, very common for dogs. For golden retrievers, it's like the top killing cancer. Now, and it's cruel because dogs die suddenly with bleeding, and there's effectively no cure unless you catch extremely early, very, very early. Now, in humans, hemangiosarcomas are called angiosarcomas, and they're very rare, but they had surprising occurrence at a factory, PVC factory, and there's a link to vinyl chloride exposure of angiosarcoma. So the researchers hypothesized that hemangiosarcoma also could be linked to these environmental exposures related to chemicals in plastics, and perhaps if hemangiosarcoma incidence is rising, it's due to the greater exposure that our dogs are getting from the environment. So we are trying to help a group of researchers start a new study looking at hemangiosarcoma and linking it to environmental exposure. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about adding veggies. So they're just the ubiquitous, and what can you do? And it seems small, but consider adding fresh vegetables. And the reason is vegetables are known to have detoxification mechanism, and they contain fiber, which can actually help flush microplastic out of the gut. It's immune boosting. So especially colorful vegetables like carrots or cruciferous vegetables. Those are really, really something that you're adding to your dog's diet. There is a chemical called sulforaphane that you can find in broccoli, fresh broccoli, lightly cooked broccoli, as well as broccoli sprouts in high abundance. And there's been just lots and lots of studies done on sulforaphane and how it can eliminate pollutants that you ate or breathed or you drank. And they're just solid studies showing how the sulforaphane can help detoxify. And if you don't broccoli, then you can order supplements. There are actually really good sources of supplements. The companies producing supplements that are often used in clinical trials. So incorporating sulforaphane or veggies into your dog's diet is a good thing. And again, health of gut microbiome. This is Leo. He loves to dig and sit in dirt, but now diverse gut microbiome is linked to so many good things. It trains the immune system, so it has anti-tumor effects. It actually produces short chain. If your gut microbiome is healthy, those beneficial bacteria will produce short chain fatty acids, which has anti-inflammatory effect. Okay, so inflammation. I think the thing that keeps on coming up is inflammation. Microplastics cause inflammation. Phthalates cause inflammation. Forever chemicals, and what can you do to counter inflammation? And so healthy gut microbiome is one of the things. I didn't mention it here, but also things like omega-3 oils, flaxseed oil, fish oil, things to consider. Antibiotics should be carefully considered. I know sometimes you have to have antibiotics, you can't avoid it. But if your dog gets antibiotics, perhaps you can give the dog probiotics, or even better, fecal transplant pills, which you can now order from companies like Animal Biome and Legacy Biome. They take fecal samples from healthy dogs. They screen them, make sure they're good, and you can order them. A 30-day supply of these fecal transplant pills are only about, I think, like $120 or $160. So if your dog is exposed to antibiotics, that's something that you might want to consider. But it's not just, what you eat, but how much you eat or how much you feed your dog. Because again, overeating is linked to inflammation, triggering aging pathways, and then messing with immune system health. So your dog, it's really important for dogs to be lean and fit. And it's not just cancer, it's arthritis, diabetes, and all the other health problems. So this is a really, really interesting graph I found, a study that I read. They looked at over 50,000 dogs and looked at the weight of the dogs and when they passed away. And so on the left here, it says 11 years to 17 years. And it says Labrador Retriever, Goldens, German, etc., Beagles, and overweight in green. So for example, Labrador Retrievers on average live to 13, according to this study, the data. And if overweight, lived longer. And if you go down the line here, the dogs with normal weight definitely live longer. But check out Dachshund and Pomeranian and Chihuahua, these smaller dogs, makes a huge difference for these smaller dogs. They're living 2 years longer if they had a healthy weight and compared to overweight. My sister actually has Cocker Spaniel and Dachshund, and I visited her house and I noticed that they're really chubby. So I said, Yuri, you should consider putting them on a diet or just watching how much they're eating. And I think they're all annoyed with me, especially the dogs. But last time I saw them, they looked pretty healthy. And just watching weight is important for people and for dogs. Now, this study that was done about 30 or 40 years ago by, I think, Nestle Corporation, they had 48 Labrador retrievers and they paired up the puppies into dogs who were going to be fed a certain amount of kibble, normal amount of kibble, and then they reduced the amount of food that they're giving to the pair, the second. Okay, so exact same food, but different quantity. And they followed them for a long time. And this is the survival plot. So if they're just given normal quantity of food, they live to an 11 something, 11 years. But then look how much longer they live when they're fed just slightly less. And another way of saying this is at 12 years, the dogs who are fed less are still alive at 12 years. But dogs who are normally fed, only 30% were alive. And there's almost 2 years difference. So it's not just, whether you feed them high quality kibble or homemade food, but it's also the amount that you feed them because it's all linked to inflammation, all those things. So, overweight, when you look at the dog from the top, you hopefully see a cinching of the waist. So please be mindful of the weight. Now, I also want to mention the link between the brain and the gut and the immune system. It's called gut-brain axis. There's a vagus nerve that modulates the gut in response to how you're feeling and the stress that you're under. And that changes the immune response. Number 4, exercise your dog, reduce stress for yourself and for your dog, and have some fun. Constant stress does weaken the immune system. It's related to release of cortisol and gut microbiome dysregulation. So get good sleep, get exercise, don't stress out. After I tell you all this bad news, don't stress out because it really does make a difference. So, and then other things that I should mention is good quality sleep is huge. And it has to be, you want to sleep, and the dog should be sleeping in a dark room without those little blue lights from TV and radios and things that you find everywhere because it interferes with melatonin production. And melatonin is critical for regulating sort of a circadian rhythm. Avoid too much sun. In dogs, melanoma is not caused by mutation due to sun. It's a different kind of mutation, but there's plenty of cutaneous hemangiosarcoma, carcinomas that's caused by too much sun, especially in the southern states. And just overall, figure out ways to reduce chronic inflammation. That includes viral infection, bacterial infection. There was a series of studies done by researchers who said that hemangiosarcoma seems to be correlated with a certain bacterial infection. It's been replicated, but that's one hypothesis. Hemangiosarcoma is linked to some kind of infection. You understand what your dog feels and looks, how he or she looks normal. So make sure you can identify little changes, feel him or her, see if there's any bumps, and monitor those lumps or sores if they lymph nodes, which are here at these locations, just like with people, under your throat, around your collarbone, around your arm and leg. And if you can identify something that's abnormal, then you can take can go to the vet. So I hope this wasn't too depressing. It is good to understand that there are these risks, and scientists are finding more about the threats in these new new chemicals that are to become really pervasive in our environment. So even our clothes that we wear, if we are wearing synthetic, you know, fabric clothes, and they go into wash and they go into dryer and it's spinning in the dryer, and you're like spraying all this micro and nanoplastics into the environment, and you're breathing it, and they're also going to the water. And the tires shedding microplastics, they're also going to the water. We eat the fish because fish is supposed to be good for you, but now they are contaminated with microplastics as well as forever chemicals and these other agents. But they induce, the way they act typically is through inducing inflammation, increasing inflammation. You can take action to reduce inflammation, such as omega-3 or veggies, or you can sort of push back and counteract. And we really need more studies to really identify why and if and why they're getting more cancer, and we reverse and help more dogs. So that's it for today. I am going to, let's see, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. We'll release this recording, and then we'll probably also the slides as well. And I think we will be having Wag Love Life fundraising walk in May. So I hope you'll be able to join us. I hope you'll consider partnering with us, and or becoming a monthly donor. We'd love to have you join. And if you have ideas for future webinars, feel free to email me. Some of the topics that we are thinking of covering in future are ketogenic diet and fasting. We did one webinar last year, but there's been a recent publication which is really, really interesting. So we're talking about ketogenic diet. We're probably scheduling a webinar on electrochemotherapy. A veterinarian once said, "This is too good to be true." Electrochemotherapy doesn't sound good. It sounds scary because you're going to apply electric field and give chemo to the dog, but it's actually like just a small amount and it's very gentle. And we're trying to see if we can schedule a session on electrochemotherapy. You should know about it because it's just amazing. And vets are starting to offer it. Like for example, in Seattle area, I think there are only about 2 or 3 clinics that offer electrochemotherapy. But if you get electrochemotherapy, you might be able to avoid like major surgery. Or if you just can't address the cancer, you'll be able to do it with electrochemotherapy.